for quite a few of us that it's so rewarding for everyone to make this happen. It's really a team effect. Black Mountain Sangha really showing up so that we can practice together and support our visitors. We might have 9 or 10 visitors here today, and we're so grateful that you're here, right? Something really wonderful, I think, has started happening with these things that we're doing. I keep sort of pinching myself, right? And it's a sacrifice for you guys to be here. Everybody, you have to take time off work. I don't know, miss time with family, right? And there's financial considerations. So I honor the sacrifices that you've all made to be here, because it's no small thing. And especially because your practice and growth in the Dharma, as Jillian had said earlier, doesn't just relieve your own suffering. It relieves the suffering of those around you, because the wisdom and compassion that you're cultivating, it radiates out into the world. It radiates out into the world. The Buddha gave his teachings for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, out of compassion for the world. So like him, we practice for everyone, right? Our Dharma practice is medicine for all. Sorry, we're having medicine again this time. It was a theme for the spring, but medicine is here today too. Being here is a sublime act of generosity. It's a really noble pursuit. These sacrifices benefit everyone. There's a Pali phrase that I just learned about, Dhamma Chanda, which I see just reflected in everyone here. So Dhamma, of course, meaning Dharma, the truth, the true nature of things. And then Chanda represents virtuous zeal or intent. So Dhamma Chanda means being ardently interested in finding the truth, right? So dedication to truth finding. When we've had a bit of training and we see the benefits of mindfulness practice, our lives become just a little lighter. We develop a taste for the Dharma. We want more. And this skillful, persistent energy grows, right? And it's not the kind of striving that causes suffering that we talk about, right? So often, it's the opposite. We have devotion to the practice and the pursuit of truth. And no matter our level of experience, and we have a wide variety of experiences here, right? We're all here out of Dhamma Chanda. It's like radiating from you guys, Dhamma Chanda, devotion to the truth. Quick reminder, again, this weekend, your level of discomfort rises above a 6. It's really important that you leave me a note on the information board and then choose a form of practice that's soothing and pleasant rather than trying to mindfully muscle your way through the challenge. Seek refuge. First part of this talk is really kind of a practice review. And for experienced practitioners here, I invite you to listen to this practice as if you've never learned mindfulness. And for the first time, topic of this retreat will flourish with this idea of beginner's mind, right? So beginning again, beginning fresh, as if you've never heard these words before. There's some attitudes of the heart and mind that are helpful and help our practice flourish. And those of you who have had MBSR, you're familiar with these. There were 7 once, and then there became 10 after a while. They're like non-judging, non-striving, letting be, accepting and acknowledging, trust, self-reliance, gratitude, generosity. So there's many of these attitudes. Of the 7 or the 10. Of the core attitudes, the one that I think is particularly important for retreat practice, and especially this one, is beginner's mind. So we have all this time here to curiously investigate our experience with no need to perform or to succeed at anything. You can't do a retreat right. And for those of you who this might be a new retreat, you can't do it right? Or wrong, right? We have the luxury here of becoming the most beginning we can be at it, right? So to be even more beginning, right? That's what we're doing here. We're going to not try to be advanced. We're not going to try to make progress. No. Even more beginning is the way to go. Not trying to have a good sit or a good walk, right? Not identifying anything as good or bad. We need to give up on being experts, even experts at ourselves for this duration. So we'll continuously and curiously investigate our moment-to-moment experience as if for the first time, right? Without veils of preconceived notions, habits, and assumptions. So we're not trying to accomplish anything other than to investigate and accept our experience as it is with a beginner's mind. For example, as Matt was teaching us a bit, when bringing beginner's mind to walking rather than walking to the dining hall on automatic pilot, we can take each step as if we've never experienced it before, just like Matt said. We can experience walking with completely fresh eyes. As you know, I had a second hip replacement about 6 weeks ago, and it's been an interesting practice in beginner's mind, walking with the new hip. Because for the first few weeks, there was a grinding, like gears, that was audible, like it was the equipment grinding when I would change weight. And I figured that couldn't be a good thing. So I experimented just with walking mindfulness, just changing that weight so slowly until I figured out where the grinding happened. And then I, back and forth as slow as I could. And I finally figured out that, when I actually keep my inner thighs squeezed tight, I prevent that from happening. So it's a matter of strengthening the damaged muscles for stability. But, I wouldn't have been able to sort that out without mindful walking using beginner's mind, right? So, beginner's mind here. Shunro Suzuki, a Zen master, said, in a beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in an expert's mind, there are few. Right? So cultivating an even more beginner's mind in a continuous way could be our aspiration this weekend. If there was a word for the ultimate beginner, we would use that word. But there isn't, I don't think. I looked and looked and looked, but I couldn't find a word like ultimate beginner. So we'll stick with that. So with this beginner's mind, on retreat, we train to stay as close to the actual sense experiences as we can without trying to change them, increase them, or push them away. We train to be with life just as it is without making it a problem of anything. The Buddha said, and some of you know I love this quote, but when what is felt is merely what is felt, when what is seen is merely what is seen, and when what is heard is merely what is heard, and when what is cognized is merely what is cognized, this is the end of suffering. So when we can experience life as it is in all its joys and sorrows without clinging or resistance, without adding to the experience, we find freedom. The trouble is our minds aren't well trained for this at all, right? Our awareness is wired to bounce from one sense perception to the other and to continually seek out pleasant experiences and avoid unpleasant ones. The Buddha talks about this in the Samyutta Nikaya. He says, "What would happen, monks, if you took 6 lengths of rope and tied one end of each to 6 creatures? A snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey. And then you would tie the other end of all of these into a big knot and let go. Each of these animals would pull in a different direction, right? Trying to return to their particular, most pleasant, comfortable, and desired surroundings, right? Seeking the pleasant. Snake would slide towards his nest. Mr. Crocodile would crawl for the river. The bird would try to take flight. The dog would bound toward the village, and the jackal to the charnel ground. And then the monkey would scamper for the trees, right? And the Buddha uses this imagery to illustrate an undisciplined mind, where each of the 6 senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, is drawn to its own kind of pleasure. So when we practice on retreat without all the usual day-to-day distractions, we get to see for ourselves that this happens. My ears seek pleasant sounds, which for me will always be the turkeys, gobble, gobble. If I hear the turkeys, I'm like, oh. My eyes will seek pleasant sights. My nose, pleasant smells. My body, pleasant sensations. My mind prefers pleasant thoughts and emotions. Like, who knew? Like, why wouldn't my mind prefer pleasant thoughts and emotions? We can't help this. We're propelled by instinct to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And that served us really well in ancient times, but not so much now. This mess in our mind keeps us from being free. It causes rather than relieves suffering. So in the story the Buddha tells, each animal can only make headway towards its desires if it gains a temporary advantage in the tug of war over the others. Before long, each animal will expend its energy in the struggle and will eventually be dragged around by whichever is the strongest at the time. Who do you think would win? I vote for the dog. I think so, right? Depending on the dog. Daisy would win, right? In the same way, when the mind is bouncing around from sense pleasure to sense pleasure, we also become exhausted. And sometimes the strongest sense door will take hold. And for some of us, that might be eating, right? So over-consuming. It might be visual contact with screens or mental stimulation from the media. And those attachments keep us from the freedom we seek. And the Buddha said that the solution is to drive a stake through the central knot into the ground, which binds all 6 animals to one spot. Yeah? And the stake represents mindfulness of the body, the first thing that we learn in our mindfulness journey. And mindfulness of the body is the means of finding freedom from suffering. Matt shared a reading from the Satipatthana Sutta earlier, which mindfulness of the body played a central role. And that's why all of our informal practices are so focused on the body. We'll begin our guided practices this evening with mindfulness of the body as we begin to also focus on the impermanent nature of sensations, right? So mindfulness, it helps us to build the restraint necessary to overcome that chaotic tug of war. When we notice the mind wandering off to pleasant thoughts, or we notice the body's urging to nudge ourselves into a more comfortable position, we can gently let that impulse be and return our awareness to whatever that object of focus is, so that we can cultivate a neutral relationship to experience, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. Neutral relationship. And we do this again and again. And eventually the mind is content with being fully present with whatever's happening right now, whether, pleasant or unpleasant, rather than rushing off or some more pleasant surrounding. Sylvia Boorstein says this: we like to think that freedom means being free to do what we want. The Buddhist meaning of freedom is to be free from wanting entirely. To be free from wanting entirely. Right? That story told by the Buddha ends in a compelling picture of all 6 animals lying down contentedly in one another's company, no longer exerting themselves, no longer yearning for something else. And it's like that with us. When that chaotic tug of desire and aversion has been quieted, maybe with some retreat time, the mind is more able to attend to experience with more curiosity and freedom, and it relaxes. Right? We can see more clearly what's arising and passing away with that relaxation. And then we begin to recognize how fleeting and precious every moment is. Right, which is that impermanence thing. So it's difficult to start to attune to the impermanence that's everywhere until mind is quieter, till we're not bouncing around from sense perception to sense perception. So we'll be starting some of our practices with some concentration practices so that we can stabilize the mind a little bit. Yeah. All right, so that was just the warm-up and a practice review. So the rest of this evening's talk is a wisdom talk, and sometimes we call it straight Dharma. In this case, it's the Dharma principle of impermanence, right? You all know that. So it's said, I didn't say it, but it is said that impermanence is the medicine we're looking for, and it's considered the doorway to the heart. And by the way, for newer people too, for these talks, we suggest that if there's something you don't quite get or are puzzled by, try to let that be and stay with the talk. You know, especially if you're newer, these next words might be kind of a head full. So don't try to gain perfect understanding right now, right this minute. Let it percolate. We'll be revisiting these themes multiple times this weekend. So this is just a first exposure. Impermanence, anicca in Pali, right? People ask me, how do you remember these Pali words? And this is it. Anicca, there's an I there. A-N-I-C-C-A, anicca, impermanence, right? That's how I do it. It's just the I. Anicca, impermanence, right? Is the first of 3 characteristics of existence in Buddhist psychology. Sometimes you hear people call them the 3. And so besides anicca, impermanence, the other 2 are dukkha and anatta. And these 3 go together. Dukkha refers to the fact that life will have stress. It will be unsatisfactory sometimes. It's a difficult journey. And we all know this on one level, of course, but a lot of the time we're not a fan of that characteristic, right? Not really a fan of it. Anatta, again, anatta, not self. Anatta, not self, right? Refers to the fact that nothing that is impermanent can be self. So because everything is constantly changing, there's no fixed or immutable self for us to cling to. And we're usually not in tune with this idea at all, since we like to think of ourselves as selves. We like to think there's an I and a me and a my and a mine. It takes some contemplation and practice to make sense of this one. It's difficult to talk about impermanence without bringing in those other 2, dukkha, stress, anatta, not self. Right? Because taken together, these 3 are really like one truth or one jewel with 3 facets. With practice, we see different aspects of this one truth at different times. But each one leads to the other, and each one leads to a heart-mind that's more and more awake. So while we study impermanence this weekend, the shiny facets of dukkha and anatta will be seen as well. Of the 3, though, impermanence is king because it reveals dukkha and anatta. So impermanence, when we really get it and we're living in harmony with it, it reveals dukkha and anatta. These 3 characteristics, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, are lawful. They're natural laws of existence. Is there water anywhere? Impermanence is just like other laws of nature that we can live in harmony with. Like gravity and the weather. Like, we don't question these. We just know, right, that when things fall, they fall down. We don't say, like when an apple falls from the tree, we don't say, turn. Like, why did that have to happen? Like, why did it fall down and not up, right? What's the deal with that? Like, we may not like the bruise on the apple or that we have to wash it, but we don't question it's falling, right? It happens. When things fall, they fall down, not up, right? So we live in harmony with gravity. right? Because we see its results over and over again, starting from birth. My kids, some of you have kids or had young children once, they used to deliberately drop things from their high chair. That was so that they could become in harmony. They were learning this natural law that actually gravity exists and things fall down. You know, by the time they reach a certain age, kids don't expect things to fall up. They get it, right? And we expect the weather to change. We expect water to freeze when it gets below zero. We expect water to then melt as it warms up. So we live in harmony with a lot of those natural laws as well. We don't argue with it. We don't resist it. We may not always like the results of it, but we accept it without question. The difficulty is we don't live in harmony with change or impermanence the way we do with other natural laws. We can give lip service to it because there are slogans that you've heard like, this too shall pass, right? And it may speak to some shared understanding we have about the inevitability of change, but in actuality, most of us aren't in harmony with it at all. Because, and this is important, if we were living in harmony with it moment by moment, there would be no resistance, no clinging, and no suffering. No resistance, no clinging, and no suffering, right? We aren't aligned. We just aren't aligned with the changing conditions and experiences of our lives. You can ask most parents about the angst they feel upon watching their child walk into kindergarten alone. I still remember that, and my son is 35. I'm just saying. It's often the same when faced with an empty nest. Some people have experienced this. And we particularly resist changes that threaten our a false sense of a self or selfness, right? Like role as a parent, right? We resist changes in the body with aging, change in hair color, how it's growing, where it's growing, how much it's growing, skin texture, muscle mass, aches and pains and wrinkles. We resist changes at our workplace that don't shore up, again, our sense of selfness, like maybe the loss of a favorite employee who did such a great job and supported us in our work, or a change in the direction of the work that doesn't support your sense of selfness either. So whenever things shift from pleasant to unpleasant, most of us experience some resistance, even if slight. Admit it. We can all give lip service to this too shall pass, but So because of impermanence and, the constant changing of things, there is nothing that can give us the lasting happiness that we seek. Nothing. Some changes we face are dire. We develop a life-threatening illness, we lose a job, face financial ruin, lose dear family members. And it's natural for us to grieve those losses. If we didn't, we wouldn't be human, right? And while living in alignment with anicca doesn't free most of us from grief and loss, it can allow that pain to pass much more quickly and without resistance. Impermanence is so interwoven with life that it actually is life itself. Life and change point to the exact same thing, right? I heard one Dharma teacher suggest this quick mind experiment, so let's do it. Close your eyes and imagine that change didn't happen. All right, open your eyes. Like nothing would exist. So the Buddha described how a monk approached him and after bowing down, asked him, the Buddha, the world, in what respect does the word world apply? The Buddha responded by saying, insofar as it disintegrates, monk, that is the world. So basically the monk says, what is the world? Buddha says, it disintegrates, that's the world. Life is change. The world is disintegration. In this practice, we're trying to understand the depth and the truth of that statement. Because the more we live in harmony with it, the less we suffer, right? And it's so liberating when we align with the truth of things. When we can do this, the drama in our lives can be dismissed. Our energy is freed up for kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. The heart practices, right? A door to the heart. A while back, there was a quote in the New York Times, and I don't know who wrote it or when, but it goes like this. Although people may think that their body is a permanent structure, it is actually in a constant state of flux. Cells dying, new ones taking their place. Each kind of tissue has its own turnaround time, depending in part on the workload of the cells. So the cells lining the stomach last only 5 days. The red blood cells, bruised and battered by traveling 100 miles through the circulatory system, last only 120 days before being dispatched to their graveyard, the spleen. The epidermis, is the top layer of skin, is recycled every 2 weeks because it's the body's saran wrap and can be easily damaged by stretching, solvents, and wear and tear. The liver processes plant poisons and drugs that pass through our lips, and the whole liver has a turnaround time of 300 to 500 days. By this time next year, some of us will have a new liver. Other tissues have lifespans in years and not days. Even the bones undergo a complete makeover. The entire human skeleton is recycled every 10 years or so in adults, as twin construction crews of bone dissolving and bone rebuilding crews work to remodel it. So, with more mindfulness and concentration, we can experience change on much, much more subtle and profound levels. The mind can start to see change happening really quickly. We see that all that is happening is change. It's no secret or advanced teaching, actually. And when we see more and more deeply into the truth of things, of change, this helps the heart and mind to let go of clinging to anything, physical or mental, because the only outcome is that thing will go away. Like, we don't place our happiness on it because it's already going. There are some barriers, though, to seeing impermanence everywhere. And one of them is the thinking mind. The thinking mind tends to perceive life in a kind of staccato, in little chunks or freeze frames. Like if we look at our yard, we might see a leaf move. We might then see the glint of a gate, or then hear a bird or a car, but it's staccato, right? Things are seemingly disconnected. So that's one barrier, is the thinking mind. And we'll be working with that thinking mind later this weekend. Another barrier to seeing anicca everywhere is that our mind is drawn to the shiny and new, the novel. It gets bored quite easily. So we get distracted and miss the change that's everywhere. Oh, so we miss that change because we're looking at this new one. We're conditioned to this staccato life and always looking for the novel and the new. With mindfulness practice, we are more able to see the flow of life, the movement, the interconnectedness of everything. So when we sit, as we will get to do on retreat, and gaze at our mind and the world in stillness, with that more relaxed gaze, the kind that will flourish with practice, the mind becomes more interested in the movement of the clouds, the water, the dance of the world, right? The river of interaction between everything. We learn to stay in this ever-changing flow of life, the river of change. So on our outdoor practice time, I invite you to gaze at nature in this way, harmonizing with the river of change. You'll be cultivating enough quiet in the mind so that you can enter that flow. And we become a different kind of human being when we stay in that flow, right? We're changed. There are some ways that we'll be practicing with impermanence on retreat. And so listen up, because this is like pre-instructions. This is like, now what do I do, right? How do I practice on retreat? So one way that you can practice with impermanence on retreat is by simply noticing whether you're reactive or not when things change. So something could change, you could be reactive or you could be equanimous. For example, when we have our sitting spot all set up in just the location we want, and then we go to unpack, but we come back and return to the hall, our stuff isn't in the same place. Somebody moved it. This has happened. Happened to me once. Really? You say, I can't believe somebody is clinging so much to where they want to sit that they moved my stuff. They must be a novice meditator to cling so much. But really the only change was that your spot shifted slightly to the left. Or we could be sitting and walking at ease with a mind gathered, without any clinging, disidentified, no selfing happening. But then a difficult thought enters the mind and we identify with that. And we're like, what happened? What did I do wrong? I'm a bad meditator. But no, like you didn't do anything wrong. That's change, right? Change happens. The mind went from gathered and free to scattered and attached. That's change. It happens. It's not a problem. Do we make it a problem? All the time, right? But it's lawful, right? It's lawful for change to happen. So when, like most students do, you find yourself now not in a collected frame of mind, you can simply tell yourself, that's lawful. I am a good meditator. It's lawful. It's supposed to be that way. Things change. Don't make a problem of it. Right? That's half the battle, isn't it? That's like half the battle right there. So be on the lookout for that kind of reactivity in the face of change. The other thing is you can be on the lookout for the opposite. You could be on the lookout for equanimity in the face of change. For instance, in that same circumstance, you could say, I see my mind has changed from ease to dis-ease. Oh, no problem. Things change. It's lawful. In that moment, right in that moment, we're harmonizing with change. We're harmonizing with it. Right then, when we say, oh, okay, we're aligned with change then. Right? So you'll be looking for these little moments this weekend on retreat. There's some other ways, of course, that we investigate impermanence on retreat so that we can learn to live in harmony with it. And a lot of our practices obviously will be focused on investigating impermanence. But the very basic one, in awareness of breathing in and breathing out, helps us to see that everything is emotion. And then choosing to be open to the present moment, moment by moment this weekend, with the knowledge that things are changing and noticing these changes as deeply as we can. We train to see it everywhere. Our eyes are open to impermanence. So this is different than many retreats where our eyes are open to change. We're not just thinking, oh, there's a thought, oh, there's this, oh, there's really, we learn to stay with the stimuli, right? Because we're going, there's a thought, oh, there's an emotion, or there's a this, because that's the novel, right? That's our mind. That's that, all the different animals, right? It's Mr. Snake. So, by staying with the stimuli, like an unpleasant sensation, rather than to distract ourselves or change it or focus on something else, when we stay with it longer, that's when we get to see the passing away of it, right? It's the passing away of things that we're missing, right? And that's the much needed training, because that's where change is. So we will be learning that things aren't what they seem. Things don't stay the same. So we'll be on the alert for the passing away of experience, and we'll talk a lot more about that tomorrow. Because when you can see with discernment more and more that every single thing is in the process of arising and quenching, you grow disenchanted with stress, right? So every moment becomes so dear. Right? So living in harmony with impermanence just softens the heart. A story from the Pali Canon to close the Samyutta Nikaya again. At Savatthi, in the middle of the day, King Pasenadi of Kosala approached the Buddha, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. The Buddha then asked him, "Where are you coming from, great king, in the middle of the day?" The king replies, "Well, just now, venerable sir, I am engaged in those affairs of kingship typical for kings, who are intoxicated with the intoxication of sovereignty, who are obsessed by greed for sensual pleasures, and who have obtained stable control in their country, and who rule, having conquered a great sphere of territory on earth." The Buddha says, what if a man would come to you from the east, one who is trustworthy and reliable, and would tell you, "For sure, great king, you should know this. I am coming from the east. And there I saw a great mountain as high as the clouds coming this way, crushing all living beings. Do whatever you think should be done, great king." And then a second man would come to you from the west, and a third from the north, and a fourth from the south. And there each one would tell you, "I am coming," let's say, "from the south, and there I saw a great mountain as high as the clouds coming this way, crushing all living beings. Do whatever you think should be done, great king." And the Buddha goes on, "If, great king, such a great peril should arise, such a terrible destruction of human life, the human state being so difficult to obtain, what should be done?" The king replies, "Well, if such a great peril should arise, such a terrible destruction of human life, the human state being so difficult to obtain, what else should be done but to live by the Dharma, and to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds?" And the Buddha responds saying, "Well, I inform you, great king, aging and death are rolling in on you. When aging and death are rolling in on you, great king, what should be done?" King replies, "As aging and death are rolling in on me, venerable sir, what else should be done but to live by the Dharma, to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds?" The Buddha goes on to say, "Just as mountains of solid rock, massive, reaching to the sky, might draw together from all sides, crushing all in the four quarters, so aging and death come rolling over living beings. Katyas, Brahmins, Vesas, Sudras, outcasts, and scavengers, they spare none along the way, but come crushing everything. There's no hope there for victory by elephant troops, chariots, and infantry. One can't defeat them by subterfuge or buy them off by means of wealth. Therefore, a person of wisdom here, out of regard for his own good, should live by the Dharma and do wholesome and meritorious deeds," right? And then steadfast should settle faith in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. So let's sit quietly before our walk.